Santa and Mrs. Claus live at the North Pole in a magical village surrounded by a deep forest, which is home to many special creatures. You know about the reindeer, but there are many other animals as well, like the Snow Bunnies. Snow Bunny's fur is as white as the snow, and they're hard to see at the North Pole, which has snow on the ground most of the time. And, they're also very timid. And when they see you coming, they stay very still and they blend right into the snow. In fact, you never even know that they're near. In fact, Santa and Mrs. Claus have never even seen a snow bunny until, well, let me tell you the story. It happened just after Christmas last year. Mrs. Claus and Santa and the elves are very busy getting ready for Christmas. Toys need to be made, and Mrs. Claus makes sure that all the Christmas cookies and the candy canes are cooked perfectly. And Santa checks the naughty and nice list in his office and waits for the elves on the shelves to give their reports because, we don't want to give any toys to naughty boys and girls. Well, we hardly have time to relax, and after Christmas Eve, after all the toys are delivered, Santa and Mrs. Claus and the elves can relax a little bit and do a couple of things. Well, last Christmas Day, Mrs. Claus and Santa went for a walk in the forest. What a beautiful day it was. It had just stopped snowing, and the sun came out and made the snow sparkle. The birds were singing their songs, serenading Santa and Mrs. Claus as they walked through the forest. And pretty soon, they came to a part of the forest that they had never been to before. The Christmas pines were so thick you could hardly walk through them, and they noticed that there were little paths that were leading to and fro. So Santa and Mrs. Claus got curious, and we decided to follow one. Well, as we walked along, the Christmas tree pines were so thick, Santa had to walk sideways and hold in his belly so he wouldn't rip his coat. And they followed the path, and pretty soon they came up to a knoll, and they decided to climb the knoll. And when they got to the top of the hill, they noticed that there was a clearing. It was a pretty good clearing, but all of the snow in the middle of the clearing had been tamped down hard. We wondered what it could be. What was this place? Well, Santa remembered a story that Grandfather Elf had told a long time ago about the Snow Bunnies having a dance around Christmas in the full moon. Boy, Mrs. Claus, do you know what this place is? Said Santa. We must come back tonight when the moon is full. So Santa and Mrs. Claus hurried to the village to get their warm clothes, and Mrs. Claus made a thermos full of hot chocolate and her wonderful gingerbread cookies. And while Mrs. Claus was getting all of the refreshments ready, Santa went out to the reindeer barn and got a blanket that they use to cover the reindeer when it's very, very cold. They needed to stay warm as they sat quietly waiting for the festivities to begin. Well, as the sun began to set, Mrs. Claus and Santa started out, hoping that they would be able to find the magical knoll once again. As they walked, they noticed that the sky was growing dark, and the brightest of the stars were starting to twinkle. Soon they came to that knoll where they had seen the paths, and they followed the path up to the clearing again. And Santa picked out the perfect spot that they could see the whole clearing. He cut some pine boughs, and Santa and Mrs. Claus lay down on the pine boughs, and Santa covered them up with the reindeer blanket. And phew, Mrs. Claus scolded, "This smells just like Prancer." Well, Santa had to explain to Mrs. Claus that, if the Snow Bunnies smell the hot chocolate and the gingerbread and Mrs. Claus's peppermint perfume, they're not going to dance. So we had to put up with the smell. Well, the sun finally set, and the moon rose in the sky to light the whole clearing. They heard a thump in the distance, followed by another thump from the opposite side of the clearing. And soon there were many thumps coming from all around the woods, around the clearing, and Santa realized that all of those thumps were the Snow Bunnies telling each other that it was time for the dance. So Santa and Mrs. Claus huddled under the blanket, and soon Mrs. Claus nudged Santa Claus, and she pointed to a trail, and the bushes started rattling by the trail, and soon out stepped the biggest Snow Bunny that Santa can imagine there was. And he must have been an important snow bunny because he had a black top hat and a blue vest. And Santa realized that this must have been the mayor. Well, when the mayor got into the clearing, he looked all around to make sure that nobody was around, that no humans were around. In fact, he even looked towards Santa and Mrs. Claus 2 or 3 times because I think he thought that he could smell something. Maybe he thought he smelled that we were there. Well, after he looked around and he had satisfied himself, he gave a thump with his hind foot and then another thump. And then the clearing came alive. All of the snow bunnies came out of the trails. There must have been 100 snow bunnies, and they all looked around, and when the mayor gave another signal, the snow bunnies looked at each other and they bowed, and the band started thumping out the rhythm, and the snow bunnies started to dance. Oh goodness, how they danced. Bunnies were jumping high in the air. Bunnies were doing somersaults over each other. Some snow bunnies were dancing the jig, and other snow bunnies were doing the twist, and some snow bunnies were even doing a square dance. Santa was so amused he had to stifle his ho-ho-hos because he didn't want to scare the snow bunnies away. Well, they danced. Oh my goodness, they danced until the moon started getting low in the sky. And the moon shadows got very, very long. And this mayor gave another signal. And the snow bunnies formed a big circle all around the clearing. And they put their front paws on top of the snow bunny in front of them. And they started dancing around the clearing, one after the other in a line. And as soon as they got to the path that they took to get there, they went home. And pretty soon, all the snow bunnies were gone, except for the mayor. And he took one last look around to make sure that all the snow bunnies were gone. And he looked right in the direction of Mrs. Claus and Santa. And he gave a little smile. And he gave a little bow. And he put his finger to his nose. And he was gone. Well, Mrs. Claus and Santa couldn't believe their luck. Not only had they actually seen snow bunnies, but they had seen them dance. As they walked back to the village, they wondered, well, how could we tell the elves what we had seen? Who would believe us? Well, Mrs. Claus said, maybe you can tell the children about it next Christmas. They'll believe you. And Mrs. Claus chuckled and said, children always believe Santa Claus. You know, seeing magical, mystical creatures is very exciting. And Santa told you about when Mrs. Claus and Santa saw the dancing snow bunnies, which was very exciting, and we were excited to be able to tell you about it. Now, I would like to read you a story about a man who saw Santa Claus many, many years ago and how he described him. The name of the poem is The Night Before Christmas. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimneys with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. St. Nicholas, that's me. It's another name for Santa Claus. The children were nestled all snug in their beds while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out of the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprung from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles, his curses they came. He whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As the dry leaves before the wild hurricanes fly, when they meet with obstacles meant for the sky, so up to the house the cursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys was flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was pulled up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was a chubby, plumpy, right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and to fill all the stockings and turned with a jerk. And laying his finger on the side of his nose, up the chimney he rose. He sprung to his sleigh, his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down on a thistle. But I heard him explain ere he drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Well, that was quite a story, and it was interesting to see what the author thought of Santa Claus when he actually saw him. Well, I'm happy that we had this time together, and I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. And Santa's one wish for you is that we all be kind to each other and treat other with respect. And you know, there's one other thing. In Christmas time, this time of year, there are a lot of people that don't have enough to eat. And when you're going out and doing your Christmas shopping and making out your Christmas list, or even writing Santa a letter to tell him what you would like, I was wondering if you could just give a thought and maybe make a gift to your local food pantry or your local church so that we can make sure that everyone this year has enough to eat. Well, that's my wish and my hope. So I wish you a Merry Christmas, and I'm reminding everybody to be nice so I don't have to have a naughty list on my sleigh this year. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.